hello. You surprised me there. I'm just standing here in the percussion studio here at East Tennessee State, playing, not well because I'm not a percussionist, you know that, you know I'm a brass player. This is called a vibraphone. And as you can see, it's made of lovely metal bars, and it has a nice ring to it when I hold down the little pedal on it. It's one of many percussion instruments that we have that we call definite pitched instrument. It has notes. If you look at it really closely, you can see it looks a lot like a piano keyboard. We have set of 2, set of 3, so it's laid out exactly like a piano, and you'll see that as we look at the other instruments in this same family. That means that we can play things that were written for piano, obviously within the limitations of our 2 hands and 4 sticks, and I can only use 2 at a time, so I'm not that proficient. But it's one of the instruments that in the percussion family that can actually be part of the melody, and that's not true of most of the instruments because they are not specific pitch, and we'll look at those in just a minute. So again, this is a vibraphone made of metal, has a sort of a dry sound if you play it like that. It also has a pedal, sort of like the piano has. That lets the notes ring so you can actually play chords, and that's a kind of a cool thing that the other instruments in this particular family cannot do. So now let's take a look at the really big instrument that's behind me. Let me take a walk back here to this marimba. Here we have a marimba. You can see that it's really large, that this is like probably 8 feet long. So it has a really large range that, it can play from a very low note to a very high note. Unlike the vibraphone, which we just looked at, this is made out of wood. In particular, these are made of rosewood, which is a pretty common wood choice for marimbas. You can see that it has these great big bars underneath, and those are the resonators. Now, when we talked about sound, we know we have to have something to produce the pitch, something that vibrates. In this case, it's the wood, but although you don't think about wood being a vibrating surface, it can. But if we just had this wood sort of out in space, we could hit it and it would go thunk, and that would be just about it. So these resonators here work just like the body of your guitar works. If you just play the strings on your guitar, you don't get a lot of sound, but the body of the guitar amplifies it, makes it so you can hear it. So these are like amplifiers for the marimba. Again, it's laid out like a piano keyboard, so that's looking really familiar. And if you're a good percussionist, you can do fancy little roll things. But lucky for us, we actually have a real percussionist here today. This is my colleague, Dr. Rande Sanderbeck, and he is a fabulous percussionist. So he's going to show you what a marimba should sound like when it's in the hands of a trained professional, unlike me. Okay, we've looked at the marimba. Now let's look at this instrument. You can see it looks a lot like the marimba. It's got the rosewood bars, it's laid out like a keyboard, but you can also see that it's much smaller. I can actually span this one with my arms, and I couldn't come close on the marimba. So this is called a xylophone, and as you can see, it's smaller. If you look at the pipes down below, the resonators, they're also pretty small. You can barely see them probably in the camera. So that's going to make the pitch of this much higher sounding, because as we know, bigger tubes make lower sound. So smaller bars, smaller tubes, everything's going to be higher pitched. It also has a somewhat drier sound than the marimba. You heard the marimba, it's just a wonderful, lush, kind of deep sound. Xylophone sounds very much different from that. So let's have Dr. Sanderbeck come back and show us what that's going to be like. I have in my hand here several sets of mallets. That's what we call the instruments that we use on these xylophones and marimbas. Not beaters, not sticks. We call them mallets. And you can see that they're all different colors, but what you really can't see is that they're also different hardness. And that's what makes a difference in the sounds as we play the marimba. So composer may want a much softer, less defined kind of sound, or they may want a really crisp kind of sound. So we're going to go to a progression here, starting with the really softest set of mallets, and Dr. Sanderbeck will demonstrate for us. The next softest, I don't know if you can tell this on the camera, but you can tell it's fuzzy, like the yarn is sort of like a little halo around the mallet. All right, now we're going to go one less soft, a little bit harder mallet. We're still using yarn mallets, but now we're on one that's really tightly wound. It almost looks like a really tightly wound ball of yarn that you might find at the store. And you can see that every time we change mallets, the sound is getting a little louder, and it's not that he's working all that much harder, just that the mallet itself is producing more sound. So that's the last of our yarn mallets. Now let's go to this one, which is made of hard rubber, I think. Very different sound we're going to get from this. Thank you, Dr. Sanderbeck. Appreciate that. As you can see when he was playing, sometimes he played with 2 mallets and sometimes he played with 4. 4 is like the gold standard for a mallet percussionist, so they can play chords and really produce a lot of variety that you wouldn't necessarily expect from something that's just 2 hands and a couple of sticks in your hand. So, all right, so that's our pitched keyboard types of instruments. Now let's go look at the other pitched percussion instruments. All right, we've looked at the keyboard percussion instruments, which have specific pitch. Now we're going to look at these drums that also can have specific pitch. These are timpani. We always refer to them in the plural because we don't ever play just one at a time. So one drum by itself would be tympanum, but nobody ever talks that way about timpani. So we can see here that we have 4 of these. And you see that they look a lot like the pot you would boil, the cannibals would boil people in bad movies. So we also call these kettle drums because they do look like big copper kettles. And the kettle actually serves as a resonator, and we're getting a lot of resonance actually now because my voice is bouncing off the heads of these. So he's going to play the heads of each of these drums, and you can see that they're different sizes. So we start here with the big 32-inch, and then we go to 29 to 26 to 23. And there are actually, I think, probably larger and smaller timpani, so sometimes you might see 5 or 6, but 4 is a pretty standard set. In classical period music, we generally only see 2. So the number of timpani you might see in the orchestra will differ. You'll also see that the timpanist has to tune the drums during performances because they're changing pitch. So they have a pedal on the back that moves up and down and changes the pitch of the drum. And if you watch at a concert, you'll see them. I'll ask Dr. Sanderbeck to demonstrate how they look when they're tuning during a concert. They actually stick their head down next to the drum because they can't go bang, bang, bang while the rest of the piece is going on. They've got to get down there and be sort of intimate with it and tune the drum. So we can see that he has a different kind of mallet than we had for the marimba and xylophone. This one is a different kind of fabric. And they also come in larger and smaller sizes. So the conductor might say, I'd really like a more defined sound, in which case they would change over to a harder type of mallet. So let's ask Dr. Sanderbeck to demonstrate his timpani for us. Now we're going to look at percussion instruments that do not have specific pitch. Doesn't mean they don't have a pitch, but it's not like we can write on the staff, play a C with this instrument and it can happen. That's not the way they work. So these are the instruments that most people think of when they think percussion, and these are the drums. And as Dr. Sanderbeck will tell you, he's a percussionist. He's not a drummer. A drummer just plays drums. A percussionist plays all those other things that we're also talking about. So percussionist is a big step up from drummers, and not that drummers don't have their value. But you can see here we have a lot of different kinds of drums. They're freestanding, they're in pairs. Some of them, I don't have any solos, these are all in pairs. So drums actually get used in lots of different kinds of ways, and we have different sizes. The bigger the drum, the deeper the pitch, just like every other instrument that we've talked about. They all have a similar kind of head, although if we were looking closely, we could see that some of them are clear and some are not, but that's mostly cosmetic, I think. And they're all played by striking. Percussion instruments, there are basically about 4 things you can do to make a sound. You can strike it, you can scrape it, you can rub things together, you can shake it. Those are the ways that we make sound with percussion. Drums are pretty much things that we strike. So we have, as we say, lots of different sizes of drums. We're going to start with this very small one, which is called a snare drum. And most people have heard this because every kind of band in the world uses a snare drum. Marching bands have them, rock bands have them, even country bands, and I don't know, there's probably some bluegrass bands out there who have snare drums. So this is the smallest of the drums. You can now see that it's got this head that's held on. And the head actually has to be tuned, even though we're not tuning to a particular pitch. We're just trying to get it so that the sound is consistent all the way around the head, so you don't get a thunk on one side and a whack on the other side. But what makes it a snare drum is the other side. So on this other side, we have these metal things, which are called the snares. And that's what creates the characteristic sound. Right now, I don't have the snares, what we call on. So if I tap on this, it sounds just like any other kind of drum. But when I tighten the snares up, you get the sound that we associate with hearing a snare drum. So snares on, snares off, same drum can make 2 different sounds. So if you're watching a performance and the drummer all of a sudden sounds like something different, chances are they just flipped the switch and they've taken the snares off and we're getting a different sound. Now we're going to move over to Dr. Sanderbeck's drum set here, or a drum kit it's also called, which has lots of different kinds of drums on it as well. So he's got a snare drum here. We have a bass drum here on the ground, the biggest one, which he plays with a pedal in the back. This is the same drum you would see in marching band, but they would carry in front of them and do this way to play. In a concert band, it would be on a stand and you would play it standing up. But they're all basically the same drum. They come in different sizes. It's just a matter of which way you're choosing to play it. So he also has some taller drums, a big one on the ground, a pair here, but he's also got cymbals. Cymbals are really old instruments. They are come from the Middle East. In fact, Zildjian, which is the brand name on this one, actually means cymbal in Turkish or Arabic or some language like that. These are made of metal, basically just sort of big sheets of metal, and they also come in different sizes. So we can see that he has a fairly large one here. This one's fairly small. They come great big. You've seen them in marching bands where they do the great big crash together, and they hold them out and they look pretty and they ring all beautifully. We also have a double set of cymbals here. If you could just sort of demonstrate that for us. This is called a hi-hat, and so it gives a different kind of effect. Cymbals, you can crash them together. You can use the mallets that we used on Timpani or Marimba, softer mallets, and get a really lovely roll out of them. You can just strike them and make a big crash. And anybody who's ever seen a drum solo in a rock band has seen them do practically all of those things, because that's what drummers do. So we're going to ask Dr. Sanderbeck to give us a little demonstration of drum kit playing. Thanks, Dr. Sanderbeck. You might have noticed that in none of the examples that he's done for us has he had music in front of him. And part of that is because he plays all the time. He has a lot of things in his head. But we don't want you to get the idea that percussionists don't read music, because they do. A set drummer is probably not likely to have music in front of them because obviously they're busy. They've got two hands and both feet busy all the time. They don't have time or any limbs left to turn pages. So they pretty much learn everything and they go on their merry way. But if you look at the percussionists in an ensemble, you will see that they have music in front of them, and they do indeed learn how to read the music. So I'd like to thank Dr. Sanderbeck for sharing his time with us today. It's been terrific to have a professional percussionist to demonstrate for us. And we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about all the other little bits of percussion that we might see in a concert. All right, I have in front of me now what we would call accessory percussion instruments. They're mostly small, very portable, and very diverse. Many of the instruments that we get in the percussion family come from outside the European tradition. Drums are sort of universal. We associate them mostly with Africa, but they are certainly around the world. But many of the instruments that we use are specific to a particular geographic region. So as we look at these instruments here, we can see we have some gourd instruments with shells and various other decorative kinds of things to help make sound. Those are primarily African types of instruments, or South Pacific perhaps. We also have instruments that come from the Mexican or Hispanic tradition that are here, and we'll listen to each of these a little bit. We have a bell tree, which is a very Asian approach. We have little tiny cymbals. We talked about the big cymbals, but these little finger cymbals are also used. Even things like jingle bells. You can't have a Christmas concert without a set of jingle bells. So there are lots of different kinds of small instruments that we use, and we just call them all together accessory percussion. So there's usually several people in an ensemble who are playing all of these instruments. Or you might see the timpani player might have, for example, a triangle hung on his music stand, and he's playing timpani, but there's a section where there's no timpani, but there's a triangle part. So you would see the timpanist put down his timpani mallet, grab his triangle thing, ring his triangle, put it away. Usually they hang it on a stand, which is why it has this lovely little clip to do that. So most percussionists are going to be playing many different instruments during a performance. So that's a fun thing to do while you're watching a concert, just to see what the percussionists are up to. How many places are they running around back there, and what kinds of things are they covering? So as I said, percussion instruments make sounds from various different ways. Striking, we've seen a lot of drums and other mallet instruments. We have things that we shake, like the maraca, which basically has, traditionally would have some sort of seeds or rice on the inside. Commercial ones generally would not have food products on the inside, but that's the history of that. Things that we shake. These huge gourds we would also shake. stylish, don't you think? She's like a lady with a pink hat. Decorations are a big part of some of these percussion instruments. This one is made of cowrie shells, so it's got almost like a fishing net full of seashells, which creates a slightly different sound. So depending on what you put on the outside of the gourd, you can get a different sound for special effects. I don't know what we call this instrument, but it's cool. Basically, it's just like a string of metal beads, and it's played like that. So this is a case of an instrument that we love to create friction to do. You can shake it, but it doesn't get much sound. So this is one that creates sound that way. We have the castanets, which if we were really talented percussionists, and I'm not because we know I'm not one, we would do it with the little ones that go between. But most percussionists not only don't know how to do that very well, it's also pretty hard if you're playing something else to suddenly grab up a castanet, the proper kind of castanet, get your fingers in all the right places and play it. So we will often see this sort of castanet on a stick approach because it's easier to do quickly. Again, that's from the Mexican Spanish tradition. This is one of my favorite instruments. It looks like a fish. We'll see that in a lot of auxiliary percussion kinds of things, is that they have interesting shapes that relate to perhaps the culture they come from. This is actually called a huiro. It's spelled G-U-I-R-O, but it's pronounced huiro. It has a little mouth. See, my fish has a little mouth. Has little holes in it for you to put your fingers in. And this is one of those instruments we scrape. So you may have heard that sort of sound in a piece somewhere and wondered, what on earth are they doing to make that sound? Wouldn't necessarily have to look like this. You get any kind of ridged surface that you're scraping back and forth, and you would create the same sort of sound. All right, let's look at tambourine. This is teeny tiny tambourine. They also come in big sizes. Basically, it's like a little drum. You strike it like a drum, but it also has rattly things. These are the almost like little tiny cymbals here. So we get not only the percussive sound of the strike, but we get the rattle of the sound, and we can roll it. And if we were truly gifted, and I'm not, you may see a percussionist lick their thumb and roll it across the tambourine. It's called a thumb roll, and it makes it all vibrate. But you have to have your thumb wet and do that, and we're not going to do that. You can watch for that in a concert. All right, so let's look at these metal things here. This is a bell tree, which is pitched, but it's not like if you looked at the music, it wouldn't say play the G note in this bell tree. It's really a special effects kind of instrument. Let me find something to play with here. Has a very nice ethereal sort of sound. You hear it a lot in pieces where they're trying to create a sort of atmospheric effect. You may also see this as a set of almost like chimes hanging from a rack, and you would play it this way. So it's basically the same instrument in two different kinds of constructions. Let's finish up with our little tiny cymbal. These are called finger cymbals, or sometimes called Turkish cymbals because they're small. They're very popular, strangely enough, during Mozart's time. They were very fascinated with the whole Turkish thing. They're like, whoo, that's very exotic, we like that. But instead of using great big cymbals, which we really get from Turkey, their idea of Turkish sound was this. To ring together these tiny little cymbals. So as you listen to some of those pieces, you'll see the word Turkish in titles a lot in Mozart's time, like Turkish March, Rondo a la Turk, those kinds of things. Listen for little tiny cymbals and you will know that those were finger cymbals. So again, we have lots and lots of instruments. These are just a very small sample. We could go up to things like gongs, which are big and cumbersome, to little tiny things like our little tiny triangle, our little tiny cymbals, and create all sorts of interesting sound effects back in the percussion section.